Hey everyone, and welcome to the Cheyenne Hills Podcast, Verse by Verse. We know it's often hard to find time to spend studying God's Word, so we're happy you can join us as we read, unpack, and discuss Scripture every Tuesday and Thursday. We hope you enjoy the program.
Across the street and around the world, Cheyenne Hills.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm thinking we should call this Back to Genesis because we just keep coming back to Genesis, and now we're coming back to Joseph and his story. I think it's kind of interesting. In chapter 37, the brothers sold him down the river, so to speak, right, to the Egyptian train of camels going to Egypt. And then we had 38, which was the most bizarre story of Judah.
Yeah.
And I mean, and Tamar and all this thing with them, and really played it out for, there's several years that passed right there. It's almost a little novel in chapter 38, family growing up and not being married, all that stuff with Tamar.
Yeah.
And then here we are now back to in chapter 39 of Genesis, and we're back to Joseph. Joseph is down in Egypt. And so I just want to try to get you caught up, and there's a lot that happens here. So here we go. Now, Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. And the Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now, just so you know, this, according to my commentary, 13 years passed. And Ken, you were saying, how old did you think he was when he was sold?
He was 17.
He was 17. So we know that for sure.
Yeah.
And then he was down there, they think another 13 years. So we're talking about a 30-year-old man, and he's been through the ranks, and people have recognized I don't know if they see God's hand, but he's a special guy, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah. And the text tells us he was successful.
Because of God's hand was on
Yeah.
him. And so people see that in him. So now we've got a 30-year-old young man, and here we go, chapter 39, verse 3. Now his master saw that the Lord was with him. Okay, there you go. And how the Lord had caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight, and became his personal servant. And he made him overseer over his house, and all that he owned he put in his charge. So pretty big steps of increase, right?
Responsibility.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he proved himself faithful in all these things. And I think those are proving grounds. I think it's important because it's probably going to save his life. And it came about that from that time he made him overseer in his house and over all that he owned. And the Lord blessed the Egyptian house on the account of Joseph. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned in the house and in the field. So he left everything he owned in Joseph's charge, and with him there he did not concern himself with anything except the food which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. All right, so we get to see this progression of Joseph. I don't know, what do you picture when you see this? I mean, I see kind of a mentoring, a testing, and he just keeps getting these raises, so to speak.
Yeah. And apparently, he probably starts out in a lower position like most incoming, slaves would. And yeah, he just proves himself responsible and faithful and talented.
Yeah.
And just gets promoted, and it's like, you did a good job there. We're gonna move you up to this place, and he just keeps working.
And one of the things too, just the idea of asking God's favor rather than he didn't pray. I don't think he was praying for promotions. We never see any of that. But for us, if we were to apply it, is like, we need to ask for God's hand on our lives, and that he would raise us up through the ranks or not, versus ourselves trying to. I just saw that in this little passage. You have any thought here?
Well, I guess, here we've got this Egyptian officer, and so he's looking for order and and some kind of, what do you want to say, not chaos. And so the fact that Joseph was able to please his boss,
Yeah.
I mean that just really says a lot of who Joseph was. And again, like you said, these were all skills that probably were acquired as he, kind of worked his way, for the last 13 years. So I don't know. I just think it's kind of interesting that It just says that he didn't have to worry about anything but food. I
Yeah,
mean, things
no.
were running smoothly, and don't we all want places to work or wherever we're at for things to run smoothly? And so it really just says of how Joseph is growing here.
Yeah. And then we have this hint of the next scene, right? The next phase, because it says, now Joseph was handsome. I mean, what does that have to add to the story? Unless, God's, all these things matter, right? And this is basically a setup. In form and appearance. So basically he was a muscular guy. I would assume that's what form would mean. Appearance would be, he's a handsome guy. And so that's being said here right before verse 7. And it came about that after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused, and he said to his master's wife, behold, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put me all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater in the house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God? It's interesting to me. So here's a guy that 17 years he spent at home. He's a junior in high school. Then he gets sold by his brothers down to Egypt. Not a whole lot of biblical context, I would imagine, for the next 13 years. And yet he knows that this is sin against God.
Yeah.
That's kind of impressive, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it is that he didn't have, and he, it's not like, oh, my family's watching, my family will know about this. I mean, it's his commitment to God, not, peer pressure like, oh, what will the other people at church think or what, or my family or whatever, but
that's a good point. He's got a commitment to God, but and an appreciation for all that his master has charged him with. He's like, man, I am not going to jeopardize. How could you even say this? He's really, really indignant, if you will, about her pass at him. Verse 10, and it came about that as she spoke with Joseph day after day, that he did not listen to her and lie beside her or be with her. Now it happened one day that he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house were inside. And she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment with her in her hand and fled and went outside. Now, just real quick, I've always, I remember Swindoll preached this passage one time in chapel, and his they hit us, I think, every day. I mean, it seemed like every chapel. This was in the early 90s. This was right after the 80s, where a whole bunch of pastors fell into immorality. And I mean, they hammered us every day on this. Day after day was some kind of message. And I remember Swindoll saying, talking about don't hang around. One thing he did, he got out of the situation. He fled. Mm-hmm. Now, if I would say that if I'd add anything to Swindoll's comments, if you're going to flee, but you should, flee with your garment.
Yeah.
Because
sure you take it all with you.
the garment caused him some trouble.
Yeah.
Anything you guys want to add here before we move on?
Well, I just loved that he was forthright.
Yeah.
I mean, he could have been passive aggressive and say, "Oh, I'm busy tonight. I'm
make
dating."
an excuse.
Yeah, make an excuse. But I love that he was so forthright.
But
But
it's
like
a sin against God.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I just think about how a lot of times he could have justified it, going, "Well, she is my," he could have justified it, but instead he stood convicted, and like you said, he got out of there.
Yeah. So in verse 13, so when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought in a Hebrew to make sport of us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I screamed. And it came about that when he heard that I raised my voice and screamed, that he left his garment beside me and fled and went outside. So she left his garment beside her until her master came home. Then she spoke to him with these words, the Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came in to me to make sport of me. And it happened, as I raised my voice and screamed, that he left the garment beside me, and he fled outside." So she's building a case. She's got all the guys. Hey, just so you know, this is what happened, and then of course tells it to her husband when he gets home. And I don't know. I think he's kind of in a dilemma. This is not in character with anything that he knows of Joseph. Joseph has run his house perfectly for 13 years. And now all of a sudden he's in a dilemma here.
Well, and she blames him. This is a slave you brought in.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
a good
so
point.
she's really
Good
putting
point.
him on the defensive.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're at fault for this.
Yeah,
your
that all
fault
this
for
happened to me.
Putting me in jeopardy. You were saying that in that day, what would have happened to an Egyptian or a servant like that, possibly, if this would have happened?
I try to do some research on crime and punishment in ancient Egypt, and for a rape or especially here's this guy who's the captain of the Pharaoh's guard, so he had a lot of power.
Yeah.
It was typically execution.
Yeah, it would have been nothing for him to bump this guy off.
Yeah,
he could
just
have easily.
to do away with that, and the fact that he puts him in jail instead of execution, makes. Did he really have some doubt about what his wife said, or just? I mean, because it's like this guy, this is out of character with what I've seen of him,
Yeah.
and so I don't know. There's a backstory there that we wish there maybe were more details or more.
And maybe this wasn't the first time she'd accused someone. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
Well, and day after day, she made a pass at him.
Yeah.
Surely Potiphar saw out of the corner of his eyes, like, oh my gosh, this.
or other people.
Or the guys in the house.
Or the guys in the
where
house,
it's like,
yeah.
what's going on here?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So
So every day, someone's going to see her
Yeah.
do something, and him, making it's like every day he's avoiding this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think you're right. I think the guys in the household knew full well, and that's why she had to bring him in and get him on her side first.
yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah.
yeah.
That's good.
So, I mean, ultimately, it's the sovereignty of God underneath the whole thing of that He's going to protect Joseph and execute His, God's plan.
Right.
So ultimately, but on the human level, why there's a lot of detail there that's like we wish they would have painted a little more picture for us to fill in some detail.
Yeah.
But
Well, and I wonder if Joseph didn't. He's like, oh my gosh, here I am again, a near death situation one more time. I mean, I wonder if he, I wonder he probably had to really trust God. Like
He
I'm
has-
in a pickle here, and I don't know what I'm going to do.
His roller coaster ride with God is not over yet. So
Yeah.
this is just the first of many things. So we're going to continue on next time. But in the meantime, thanks for tuning in to Genesis, and as we've gone back to really trying to understand a mysterious story in Joseph's life and how he tried to avoid evil, and evil just kept kind of creeping in. We're going to see how this thing ends as we go. So in the meantime, thank you for joining us, and be strong and very courageous.